At this point, I'm in the old ChangeMaker program, a new version of it, and I have created a new method for printing my debug statements. So my idea is that instead of having to repeat this code over and over and over, I'll just call my method above. So one of the main reasons to avoid repetitions, I said before, when I see myself doing something very repetitious, it makes me want to put it into a method. And there's two reasons that's the case. The first reason is it makes it a little easier to read and to mentally think about if you can group lines, one or more lines of code into a method and call it a name. It's a little bit, makes the code a little more readable. The second thing is if I'm doing something very repetitious and I'm human, I'm prone to error. It is a lot easier to manage if I can take one of these lines once, the system.out.printf line, and put it up in my method so that I am less likely to make copy and paste errors later. So those are some reasons for me to make this method. So that means that if I have made the method up above, then this one, the quarters one, I can delete it from here and just make a call to my method, which is named printDebug. Now this is not exactly going to work, but the actual errors we get are going to be instructive for us and will give me a chance to talk more about parameters here. So I'm saving, Command S, Control S on Windows. So what should happen if I just take a dry run here is I go into the main method, as Java goes into the main method, I declare my variables, get my scanner set up, I prompt the user, and I do some calculations, and then I call my printDebug to tell the user what's in the user numPennies variable right now. So that at this point, I should pop up to the printDebug method and execute this line of code right here. Now, let's build so that we can see what the errors are. In my terminal or my command line, I'm not quite where I need to be, so let me CD there. I think it's in my notes folder. Where am I? Chapter 4 ChangeMaker. Okay, Java C, Chapter 4. Okay, so here is the error that I was expecting. Line 19, cannot find symbol. It's talking about the user numPennies variable that it can't find. Okay, so let's see why it doesn't know what user numPennies is. So here's why. I'm using a variable here, user numPennies, and I declared it in a different method, and it turns out that any of the variables declared inside the braces of the main method are only good inside the main method. They don't carry over when I call the printDebug method. They're like totally different zones. So, well, what do? I mean, I need the actual value in user numPennies, and the answer is the only place that data can flow into my printDebug method is in here in the parentheses. This is exactly the place that I need in order to take data. So just for clarity, I need to say what I'm expecting to take. numPennies is going to be an int, and the thing that I'm expecting to be able to use in this method is named user numPennies. But this can get confusing when you're first getting used to methods, so I'm going to actually make a change. Just because this int user numPennies is named user numPennies and it's the same name as this int, that does not link them up in any magical way. Okay, so just to illustrate that, I'm actually going to change this from user numPennies to just numPennies. And maybe I'll just update my pennies left, because that's really, numPennies is the number of pennies left. I'll also fix my typo. Okay, so here, now I'm saying, well, I'm printDebug. I am responsible for printing out a debugging message. Whoever calls me is responsible for giving me a number here inside numPennies, and then I will throw it into my output statement here. Okay, let's save and build that. Dang. Okay, so but my line 19 error is no longer there. So now I have an error down on 51, which says error method printDebug cannot be applied to given types. So here it says it requires an int. Now my printDebug requires an int because I put one in the parentheses, And what it found was I'm calling it with no arguments. So I'm calling it with nothing in the parentheses. So it says, for a reason, it says actual and formal argument lists differ in length. And what does that mean? The formal argument list is the same thing as the parameter list in the definition. The actual argument list is the one that happens when I call it. So what this is saying is you're calling it with nothing in the parentheses, and over here when I defined it, I said I needed something in the parentheses, so that's not allowed. So let me pop down to line 51 where my error is and fix it, and then we'll take a look at how we might continue this operation. So now that print debug needs a number in here, I can send it, well, user num pennies. And this is where I wanted to make sure that I underlined the fact that user num pennies is one name for this. There's a number in here. At this point, it's the number that's left over once we mod by once we take the remainder of how many quarters are in there. Okay, so there's a number inside user num pennies. Java does not care that this is called user num pennies down here and that up here I gave it a different name. It's totally fine because it's just holding a number. It's just that print debug is calling it one thing and main is calling it another thing. So I've named them differently just to make sure that that is clear. So at this point we should be able to build because we've fixed this build error, and let's just make sure that is actually happening. Yes, perfectly fine. In the next video, we'll take a look at how we might want to refine this method to work for more lines of code in our program.